Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Tom Wells here. It is Monday. Happy Monday, December 4, 2017. Not something you normally hear on a Monday. It's Happy Monday because a lot of people are struggling to get out of bed. Oh, God, another week and so forth. But one of our stated tasks, one of our prime goals here at LOA Today is to help you appreciate and find good things about Monday. Because there are actually a lot of good things about Mondays that people don't actually think about, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the beginning of a lot of contrast. It's the beginning of a lot of changes that are going to come down this week. And if we approach contrast from the point of view that there's all kinds of gems hidden within it for our personal expansion, then this week could be an incredible adventure in growth, personal growth and freedom. And there's so much possible every week.
Absolutely true. I mean, really, all of what we talk about on LOA Today is about finding silver linings, and that's probably the first thing to do on a Monday morning, find the silver lining. I mean, if for no other reason than you can come up with, well, once today is done, I won't have to do another Monday until next week. If that's the best you can come up with, okay, well, at least it's a start.
Yeah, or maybe you can say, since every moment's brand new, then there's infinite possibilities this week for things to expand. And yes. I don't want to be in the thinking that it's going to be the same old, same old, same old.
Right.
You know, maybe something brand new is going to come about this week if I am open within myself to the possibilities of receiving something wonderful. Who knows what it'll be?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it can be almost anything, and it can produce stuff that we don't really expect until we actually, get the day going. So if we start off with the mentality that things are going to be good, then it's amazing how the good things tend to happen. So speaking of good things,
Tom, it works.
So speaking of good things, any wins lately? Any good things happening in the last couple of days?
Well, I've just had some wonderful time with this new woman that I've met in my life. I was married for 15 years and divorced about 7 years ago, and I've been dating for the last 3 years or so, and finally have met someone that is just such an amazing woman. And I found out over this last weekend just what a depth of love that we have for each other. And that's just a huge win for me because
wow.
Being with somebody that I feel that wonderful with is something that really was my dream. That was my expectation. But to have it happen, it's just really thrilling. Really feels fantastic.
That's fantastic. That's more than just a win. That's like a grand slam home run. That's such a good win.
That's right. That's what it feels like, And so I'm doing everything I can to just keep good, positive vibes going in that direction without, thinking of reasons. Oh, this can't last. How could this be this good? Well, maybe it is.
Why not? I don't see any reason why it can't or shouldn't. I mean, really, it comes down to the two of you anyway. I mean, if you are true to who you are and she's true to who she is, how can it not work?
Yeah.
So
it's just the old thinking,
Yeah, that old thinking just kind of keeps haunting us, doesn't it? It just keeps, the subconscious mind just keeps sending this stuff up, and our job is to say, no, I'm going to choose to look at things this way.
Yeah, just to relearn a whole new way of looking at life from the point of view of, well, if I'm really creating this, then what I keep thinking about is going to bring me more of the same. So I want to think about the things that I really want here. How about you? What kind of wins have you had?
Well, for me, the ongoing win is this is now week 2 of doing the podcast as a daily podcast, which is something that I think I mentioned to you has been something I've been pretty much dreaming about for a few years now, and didn't really know how to make it happen or anything like that. But back when Joel Elston was my regular co-host, he and I used to talk about regularly, almost every podcast, about how great it would be to do like a live drive time show every day and pick people up in the morning and then give them their boost when they come home in the afternoon and so forth. And then Joel had to leave last April, but when he heard that I was setting things up to actually try to do a daily show, he came back. He's going to be doing the Thursday show with me. So, it just goes to show how this stuff works out. But yeah, I'm on an ongoing high doing this thing. In fact, the schedule that we're doing now is Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 5 p.m. And also our regular podcast that we're doing on Sundays, which is now with David Bartkey at 11 a.m. These are all Eastern time. And because of that schedule, it meant that Saturday is my day off. And on Saturday, I was in withdrawal.
That's how much you like it.
That's how much I like it. It was, oh my goodness, like I can't wait till tomorrow.
Well, that's a grand slam too, Walt. I mean, anybody who can talk about their work that way, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
and you're providing something that hopefully is going to be really helpful to a lot of people. How many places can you turn on the radio dial, so to speak, and find this kind of positive talk that's hopefully really helpful, that people listen and they go, hey, I can apply this stuff. I can bring this about in my life. Or even to be inspired to go on, and find new ways of living that work better, than ways where we embrace suffering,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And actually that is a main motivator behind doing it now, because as recently as 6 months ago, we were averaging maybe 100, 120 downloads a month, something like that, which isn't a whole lot at all. Last month, we broke our record, 2,600 downloads for the month.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's great.
It's been just so
congratulations
upward. Yeah. It's exciting. So I'm just hoping.
No kidding.
I'm just hoping that, by doing the podcast daily instead of weekly, we can just accelerate that trend and, get it up to the point where we're reaching, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Wouldn't that be cool?
There's no reason not to.
Yeah.
This is exactly the thing the world needs right now, is people talking about, well, how do we face our problems, quote unquote, and actually create real solutions that are going to last, because they're coming from within each individual who's discovering that inner connection to their own peace of mind and their own, beauty, and they're showing up in the world knowing that their life can be awesome, and that they broadcast that to other people by their own attitude, their own vibration, and it's a beautiful thing,
Absolutely.
People are meant to live in a nice, balanced, harmonious way, I believe, even in spite of all the contrast, which is also helpful.
Oh, well, yes, of course the contrast is helpful. That's how we know what we don't want, which is a good thing. But absolutely, that's a big part of my motivation. And not only helping them to understand stuff like that, just helping people get off to a good start each day and to have a good finish to the day. That's a big motivator for me, because it's so important to have that fresh start that feels good rather than feels bad. I mean, we know that as LOA practitioners, but anybody really knows that. I mean, if you stub your toe when you're starting the day, it's probably going to just keep, one thing after another, the old cliche about things coming in 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s and so forth. That will probably happen. But if you start off the day with feeling good, then it's a different thing. Now all of a sudden more good things tend to happen. So, I mean, that's why we call our show your daily dose of happy. We want people to have that daily dose. And
right on.
Yeah. So
and in the law of attraction, we know that if we develop some habits, some practices like that of how we wake up each day, like I wake up each day and I do meditation. I wake up each day and I set intentions for the day, and that makes a huge difference. Like you say, it's like starting out with something positive that is uplifting and making that a practice. Then it becomes more internalized, and we just begin to do that throughout our day, and then ending the day thinking about the things that worked out, like you say you do with your wife, those 3 things at the end of the day.
Right.
That's so positive.
It is. It's positive, and it makes you feel good, and it sets a tone. I think that's probably the most important part. I mean, that's really the LOA component, but it sets a tone, and that tone carries through. And it carries through in ways that you almost don't even realize it if you're unintentionally waking up each morning. I don't mean that you'll wake up unintentionally. I mean that you wake up without intention. That you don't have any intention for how the day's going to go.
Right. Or even worse, you wake up and you right away start thinking of the problems that the pain you're feeling in your body, and, the pain you feel at work, the pain you feel with your lover, with your spouse, or with your kids, or with your house or your money. If we start immediately picking up those problems each morning when we wake up, then no wonder we feel like our life is drudgery and it never changes, or when's it ever going to get better? Because we're resurrecting that stuff every day. Yeah.
And if you're one of the many who are like me who have never really thought about this before, that's okay. It took me about 50 years to notice this stuff, but I finally did. And you can too. And it actually does pay off to know this stuff, to pay attention to it. So,
yeah.
Now you came up with an interesting topic, and you tied into it with your win for the week, which is your new relationship. Well, not new, but your what shall we say, your skyrocketing relationship, your relationship that's really taken off.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And it is new.
Relatively, yeah, sure. And it's I think it's just really a great idea of talking about relationships on Mondays, particularly since we just finished a weekend, and so many people, particularly single people, that's when they have their opportunity to reach out, try to find somebody, or if they're with somebody, spend time, quality time, and so forth. So relationships are a very poignant Monday morning topic. What do you now? Tell us your story. What happened with how you met this woman? Because I know you said that you were divorced and you were kind of not doing anything for a few years. What turned around for you? What changed?
Well, it was an evolution. It was really cool because I read this thing from Abraham about relationships, about dating, and just how that each person that we meet in our life is somehow we've attracted them into our life, or they couldn't be standing there in front of us. We wouldn't be interacting with them if there wasn't something in our vibration that's similar to what's in their vibration. And so, as I started dating, I started realizing that each of the women I was going to tea with, and then going out, maybe going dancing, going out to dinner, I was finding that they were all showing me some kind of mirror of my own self, where I was at that time. So that if I was struggling with worrying that I was going to attract a woman who looked like this or acted like that, if I was worried about it, there she would be in front of me with some of those qualities, but also there would be in her these qualities that I found very attractive, things that I really found that, were beautiful about her physically, and that were beautiful about her, who she was as a human being. And so I would see, wow, each time I'm sort of getting a little clearer, each time I go out with someone, about what I don't want in a partner, and then what I do want in a partner. So I saw it as like my inner being, source, was orchestrating for me this unfolding that I was learning step by step. And even though my mind said, well, can't I just have this ideal mate right now? Can't I just have my ideal partner now? That I needed to go through this evolution of seeing what I do want, what I don't want. And also I started to realize I'm not ready for a partner. My focus was more on my business. I was still coming out of this other relationship I'd been in. I was still in some grief about that. I had other priorities, and by having these different reflections of these women I was meeting, I was realizing that this was all just showing me where I'm at and where I may want to go. So I was cleaning up my vibration, and eventually I got to this point where I just said, I'm finally ready to have her be here. There's this thing that Abraham talks about, how your ideal partner is already there in the world. They are there somewhere, and they're preparing themselves for you the same way you're preparing yourself for them. And when the time's right, the two of you are going to meet, and you're going to know who she is. She's going to know it's you. You're going to know it's her, and it's going to be fantastic. And I thought, really, it's going to be that great, and yet that's what happened. When I finally met this woman I'm with now, it was really clear that I had taken a quantum leap beyond all the other dating I'd been doing, and I think the key to it was I had finally said in my heart of hearts, I had said, I'm ready to have you be here now. And then she showed up. And so now I'm just reeling in the disbelief that it could really be true, But I'm also eating up the fact that it's true, that she's so fantastic. And so I'm relishing the times that I spend with her because it's so rich,
It's interesting that you mentioned the whole thing about being ready for the other person, because that proved to be really critical in my meeting my wife. Because we didn't meet, like I said, until we were in our 40s. And one day, well, actually numerous times, we would talk about, why did it take us so long to find each other and so forth. And she pointed out that if I had met her when we were in our 20s, it probably would not have worked out. Because her reason was that she was so extremely codependent in her 20s that I would have tired of her in about a week, and it would have been all over. And from my own perspective, for myself, I was such a shy wallflower in my 20s. I probably wouldn't have said anything, So that's a relationship that would not have gone very far.
Yeah, right.
But by having the time to develop ourselves and become, who we really needed to be, and more confident and so forth, by the time we did meet, then it was going to work. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and the same qualities keep our relationships alive.
Oh, yeah.
With our current partner is whether or not we're looking at the things that we appreciate about them, or whether we're looking at the imperfections or the things we don't appreciate, the things that are bothering us. Mm-hmm. And I found that my process of dating was just this continual understanding that I had to focus on the things I appreciate. Like
right.
one of the things that Abraham teaches is that if you want to have ideal relationships, get out a notebook and write a whole page of things you appreciate about yourself, for starters, and then you like what I've done is I dedicate a whole page to somebody else in my life. It could even just be another friend of mine, or it could be somebody I've had a relationship with. I start writing down the positive qualities that I remember about that person, everything I can think about that to me is a positive quality. And they say that that's how we tune ourselves to more and more attract into our life the people that we want to have in our life. And in our current relationship, that attracts from the other person more and more of the qualities that we want to see manifest from them. I just had a whole experience over the weekend of doing this with my new partner, how I just focused on all the things I appreciated about her during that weekend, and I didn't focus on any of the things that were troubling to me or that would cause me anxiety about, well, is this going to work out? Little things I see in her that would make me think I'm afraid of what this might develop into going forward. Instead, I just completely turned away from those things, not to deny them, but just to not focus on them. And I focused on the things that really make me feel good when I'm with her. And it just multiplied through the whole weekend. It just got better and better and better until when finally I was saying goodbye to her, we couldn't believe how in love we were, And I think it was just like I just kept my anxiety out of it entirely. I kept my worry out of it, put my focus on the things that felt good. And I feel like, look, if the things that I worry about are strong enough, they're going to keep surfacing until, there's either going to be a dialogue about it or I'm going to decide the relationship just couldn't work out, But if I focus on all those positive things and I keep multiplying them, then that's, to me, like, well, why not? Why not have life just work that way instead of, like, fear-based,
Sure.
Whatever we're afraid of, we're going to get more of,
It's funny you should mention, too, this idea of writing down your likes and dislikes and so forth, because my wife and I met before either of us really knew what the law of attraction was. And before we met, I guess it was about 6 months before we met, she had a cat for 17 years named Shadow, who died 6 months before, and he had been like her constant companion for all those years. And it was kind of a tough loss for her. She was really kind of broken up about losing him. But one of her friends at work asked her, well, are you going to get another cat? And without even thinking about it, she just blurted out, no, I'm going to get a husband. She gave no thought to it at all. It just kind of, like emerged from her being, so to speak. And then she thought about it afterwards. So she decided to sit down and write down what qualities she wanted in a husband. And apparently it was a pretty long list. And then she finished the list. I think it took her a day or two to finish the list. She finished the list and put it away. And then over the next few months, she was asking everyone she knew, do you know any well-balanced, emotionally healthy men? which is still a little bit embarrassing for me to say because she was reaching out for me. But nevertheless, but she was asking people, and she ended up asking a mutual friend who I knew, you mentioned dancing, who I knew through the dance community I was a part of. And her friends, our mutual friend said, oh, sure, I know somebody. I don't know why she thought of me because there are probably 300 men in this dance community, but she thought of me for some reason. And set us up to talk. Well, first of all, our friend said to Louise, shall I have him give you a call? And she says, well, why don't you ask him first whether he might be interested? So, long story short, we ended up doing 3 phone calls, 1 per week. And each of these phone calls lasted probably about 3 or 4 hours. I mean, it was clear we were connecting, on an audio level. And then, interestingly enough, we finally arranged to meet, and the meeting was a disaster. Nothing was clicking. We could barely even talk to each other. It was awful. And the following weekend, actually, the person who introduced us to each other had a party because her birthday, my birthday, and another person's birthday are all within a few days, so we're having like a group birthday party. And at the party, she asked me, so how did it go with Louise? And I said, well, not real well. I told her a little bit about what happened, and she says, well, you're going to follow the 3-date rule, right? I said, the what? What's that? Never heard of that. Oh, the 3-date rule. That's where you have to give it 3 dates before you make a decision. I said, really?
Yeah.
So I said, well, all right. And sure enough, 3 dates later, all of a sudden things were different. They just felt different. I think we were just so keyed up and nervous that we really weren't, we weren't ourselves, either one of us, on that first date. So it took a little time to relax and, just let the process happen. And sure enough, about a year and a quarter later, we were married. So.
That's great.
Yeah, but that list, that's the other thing I was going to mention, the list. I told you how she'd written that list. She remembered that later on and pulled the list out. And you know what, Tom? I matched every single quality on that list.
Yeah.
It was astonishing.
I've heard these stories in other relationships, and it actually happened with my wife and I, who I was married to for 15 years. We both had a list before we met each other.
Really?
And,
oh, wow.
And we both satisfied pretty much everything on those lists. I think lists can be a good thing, but I also don't think they're necessary. I think that each time we meet somebody, we're actually tuning ourselves more to what we do want and less to what we don't want. But we have to make a decision to not any longer think about the unwanted characteristics.
Yeah, that's the key, because I found that with my own failed relationships leading up to meeting and marrying Louise, my failed relationships really failed quickly. I mean, there were no long-term relationships in there. The longest one lasted like a month and a half. That was about it. And it was one after another, cases where I was always finding that, this isn't right, that isn't right. And with good reason, don't get me wrong. I mean, these were women I was not well suited to at all. But like you said, I kept focusing on all the things that were wrong with the relationships. I never once, and I'm realizing that now, I never once really focused on what was right about them. I did at times focus on what I wanted, but when I was meeting somebody, it was always, well, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And now that I understand the law of attraction, I understand, well, that doesn't work. You can't do that.
Right. And you know what? I had a really powerful experience recently about how if I'm thinking about the things that I'm worried about in the relationship, that, maybe she has this kind of tendency or that kind of tendency, or I tend to see her this way or that way, and those are bothersome to me, those are worrisome, that if I dwell on those things when I'm with her, I get more and more and more of that stuff. Of course, that's the law of attraction. But isn't that so odd that, when a person's in say a long-term relationship with their spouse and they continually see it getting deteriorating, that's often because, one or more of the partners are focusing on what's deteriorating. They're focusing on the things that they're afraid of that they think are going south on them. And the more they focus on those things they don't like, the more that they're going to see that in the other person. It's uncanny how it just has to work that way, and it's unfortunate in a way. You wish it could just, you could worry about the things, but good things keep happening and good things keep happening. But it's all based on what we're vibrating with.
And it's funny too, with my own with my own case with Louise. What ultimately changed my pattern, what broke my pattern, wasn't that I still hadn't learned about the law of attraction by then, so I didn't understand how all this stuff worked. All I knew was that, potential relationship after potential relationship was just, crashing and burning on the first try practically. And after a while, instead of knowing how to fix it, I just gave up. I said, I'm just not going to date anymore. I'm just so sick of this. I'm so sick of getting, heartache. I'm so sick of getting burned. Screw this. I'm just not even going to do this anymore. And it was about a month after that I met Louise. I let go of it.
Finally let it go.
I let it go. Yeah. Now, did I know what I was doing? No, it was just, I was just burned out. I just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah. Well, you must have, though, had a vibration in there that of all those wonderful qualities that you found in her.
Probably.
Somehow you let it in, because you let go, and then your vortex, the universe could let it into your life because you were no longer resistant. And that's why we don't get what we want, because we're in fear, we're in resistance.
Yeah,
and it can't flow to us.
I think it was actually more that not so much that I let stuff in more, but I just stopped resisting by focusing on what I didn't want. That was the letting go part. It wasn't so much I don't think that I had. I honestly can't say that I had any clue whatsoever I was going to meet anybody, or even any hope that I was going to meet anybody. I was feeling really hopeless, but because I let go of, I'm going to try to pick apart everybody I meet, because I just abandoned that. That alone was enough releasing of resistance to let somebody new in.
Yeah. It's interesting, that idea that our inner being always knows how to deliver to us the thing that we most want, and as it's all about letting go. A huge part of it is trusting that our inner being, our higher self, who we really are as an infinite being, knows what's best for us. And so there's this combination of you could focus on the desired qualities you want in a job or in a partner or in a friendship, but then, we have to trust that our inner being is going to deliver it to us in a way that's going to be just right for us. So there is a letting go, at the same time as there is a focusing on the attractive qualities that we want. There's also this, we got to take the angst out of it. We got to take the edge off it by being relaxed and trusting that things are going to flow to us, and that's the way the universe is designed. It's designed to bless us, you might say, with a good life, if we trust that it's going to bless us that way.
Right, particularly if you've had a string of situations that didn't work out. That becomes even more important. I agree with you 100%. This whole idea of letting go is critical when you've been building up a whole lot of negative stuff about something. You just got to let that negative stuff go.
And that's one of the key points is when we've, if I've had a bad relationship, when I got divorced, it was like, well, look, this went wrong and that went wrong and that went wrong. And then it put in me sort of a fear that, well, what if I attract that again?
Yes.
You hear this story of how people, they attract the same thing over and over and over, one relationship after another.
Very
They're
common.
seeing the same qualities are showing up.
Yep.
And according to Abraham, the reason that happens is because we get fixated on the thing that went wrong, and we get, in a sense, we're terrified that it's going to happen again, and we're so, angry or upset that it could happen again that it naturally it happens again. And you've put into your vortex something that you don't want, then you automatically put into your vortex what you do want. In other words, if I've had that experience of being rejected by somebody or rejecting somebody in a certain way, that does not have to ever repeat again, because what's now in my vortex is the opposite of that. Now I know what I do want, but I have to trust that old negative pattern is dead. It's, I've got to let go of it and trust that the new thing I want is already in my vortex, and now I just have to let it in.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the trust factor is really one of, it's not going to happen again unless I keep focusing on it. It's not going to happen again unless I keep myself in a depressed state. That's the other thing. People often who are having trouble with relationships or with a lot of things in their lives tend to be depressed. It's a very common thing. Depression is rampant in this country and even around the world. And when you're depressed, obviously, take the law of attraction out of it. Just, look at it from the way a clinical psychologist would look at it. If you're depressed, you're not going to get very far. Any depressed person can tell you that. So the critical thing at that point is to find some way to feel better before you even try to reach out to somebody else. Because otherwise, if you're reaching out from a position of depression, you're really reaching out from a position of codependence. Like, you have to come into my life in order to make me feel better, which does not work. That's like a formula for disaster right there. So
yeah, as Abraham calls it, looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
That brings out the other point, is that if you want to have a perfect relationship, if you want to have an ideal relationship with anyone, you've got to first be the person that you want them to be. In a sense, like you say, you can't expect this other person to come along and fulfill you and complete you in any way. It's like we each individually have to be aligned with Source, and that's the key thing, is that alignment that we experience every day. So it's sort of like, to be ready to be a partner to somebody else, I have to be really in love with myself. I have to have such a deep love for who I am as a human being, and be aligning with my happiness to such a degree that I will attract someone who's also aligned with their happiness.
That's right.
And they're taking care of their own self in such an integral way that when the two of us meet up, we're two independently strong human beings, independently, aligned human beings, independently happy human beings. And then we have a chance of having that relationship succeed.
And it's not like when we go into a relationship that there's nothing about the other person that will help, fill in gaps and so forth. That certainly does happen, and it can be a good thing. But what can't work with something like that is the codependent viewpoint, which is you want somebody to come in to fill those gaps and then stay filled, so that you never have to worry about that again. Because in a real growing relationship, you also have to be working on yourself all that time. It's just part of being in a healthy relationship, is you're always dealing with your own stuff and trying to get into a better place, get into a better, a happier place, and so on and so forth. You can't make or expect the other person to get you there. You're the one who has to get there. So even when you do meet somebody who fills in some of those holes for you, the last thing you want to do is use that as the opportunity to say, "Oh, great, wash my hands of it, I'm done." No, it's not the way it works. Yeah, okay, you got somebody who helped fill that in to help lift you up, but now it's up to you to take that opportunity and say, okay, now I'm going to work on this stuff that was always the hard part for me. Now that I got somebody to support me, instead of using that support as something to just lean on like a crutch all the time, because that'll destroy a relationship real fast.
Yeah, I'm sort of in that phase right now myself with this new relationship, where I'm seeing that part of me wants to just collapse into just this the cocoon that we're creating together with each other, and just say, let this be everything for me for now. But there's this other part of me that like I even like force myself to separate myself from her sometimes, because I realize that when I go away and I reestablish myself in my own world and then come back and visit her again, that I'm keeping my integrity intact that way. I'm not sort of just collapsing my world into her world. And as much as fun as it is to merge with another person, there's a tremendous beauty there. But what's the balance between intimacy and autonomy? And I don't know if I spoke about that in the previous show, but I took training in life coaching with Gay and Katie Hendricks, who teach this course called Conscious Loving. And in Conscious Loving, one of the main things they teach, they say that key to healthy relationships is the balance you establish between your own autonomy and the amount of intimacy you can create with that other person, because they see a direct relationship between autonomy and intimacy. If you're really taking care of yourself and staying aligned with your own self-love, and then you bring that self-love into the relationship, that then you can go the deepest in intimacy with the other person.
And that really makes sense. That makes sense, because if you didn't do that, let's say you came into a relationship and you were not there to be, like you say, autonomous, to be responsible for your own feelings, for your own self-worth, for your own level of confidence, and so on and so forth. If you didn't do that, then what do you have to draw upon in order to help understand your partner, in order to help her through whatever it is that she's trying to go through at any given time? Well, you can't. There's no way to do that. You have to have those reserves, because when those situations happen where you're trying to help the other person because they're stumbling on something, the only way you can help them is if you're in a good place. You can't be in a good place if you don't have that confidence that you've built up, if you don't have that sense of self-worth that you've built up, you just can't do that. It takes too much out of you, and you end up being less than helpful. In fact, you can actually be counterproductive in those situations. So actually, yeah, I agree. That makes total sense. How could it be otherwise, really?
Yeah, and for me, it takes a certain courage or a certain, I don't know what the word is, resilience within myself to keep focused on taking care of all my own personal interests. You know, like I play guitar and I love to go hiking and different things I love, maybe certain subjects that I'm reading about, you know, and following all my own interests is something that I feel like in this relationship, it's really important that I stay keenly aware of how I was creating my own happiness when I was single, and not expect that I'm going to, all of a sudden, those things are going to somehow die or not be active when I'm in this new relationship. It's almost like I want to be sure that I don't try to merge with her. This is what I did in my marriage. I believed at that time that I was supposed to sort of merge with my partner in some kind of soulmate way, you know, that we were twin flames, and that somehow because we're infinite beings, that we're gonna merge on some amazing level where we become like the Bobbsey twins at the seashore. I mean, that's an old.
No, you're dating yourself a bit there, Tom.
I'm dating myself. That's from an old. What was that? A children's book or something?
Yeah. The Bobbsey twins. Wow.
You know, the thing was, you know, how much are we alike, instead of the fact that our differences make for a really exciting relationship. I mean, Abraham said that when you're looking for an ideal relationship, don't look for somebody that matches all of your qualities and they're just like you and they're going to agree with you on every aspect of your life. You don't really want that kind of person. You know, maybe, yeah, I mean, I want somebody who sees my worldview and who can agree with me on lots of things, but I want her to have such a unique perspective on life that I can constantly be stimulated by her perspective. And you know, we won't always agree on things, so that we have that dialogue going on about how we see life. You know, it makes it much more interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you really can't have a successful relationship if you agree on everything or if you disagree on everything. There has to be a mixture, because you have to have certain things that, you know, and this is going to be true if you are, you know, well matched to each other. You're going to just find that you not only agree on things, you're going to find that you're thinking about the same thing at the same time. I was just thinking about that. Stop reading my mind, you know, that kind of thing. But by the same token, because you're also individuals who just happen to be in relationship, not two people who have merged into one, because you're individuals, you also have different perspectives, and those are vital. You can't really help somebody else if you have the same perspective as them in every single way, because you're just feeding back to them the same thing they've always thought of themselves. They need something different, and if they're trying to get past something, that's where the differences really play the biggest role when you're helping the other person to, you know, deal with whatever it is they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And something that's so amazing about that is that I'm learning from law of attraction, things that I read and stuff, is that it's the diversity in the world that makes the world what it is. The fact that there are so many different types of people that are completely polar opposites of each other in many cases, you know, and everything in the spectrum, that's actually what makes life so rich, is that when we let each person have their own idiosyncrasies, then that's what makes makes the world go round, because it just is a constant contrast that stimulates change, it stimulates creativity, it stimulates interesting developments, you know, in communities and in families and in nations. You know, it's all these different people, because sometimes, you know, we try so hard to get people to agree with us, or we think that, well, if we could all just agree, like different religions do that a lot, right? If we could all just be Christians, or if we could all just be Muslims, or, you know, that the world would work out, you know, if we could all be Buddhists, then everything would work out. But it's not that way.
No, it's not.
We need that diversity.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. You'll also mention something that kind of keyed something in my mind. A common belief, which I would describe as a fallacy, is that opposites attract. And it's understandable why people would say that, because if you're opposites with the ways that you're opposites, you provide that opportunity for the other person filling in the gap, so to speak. And that is attractive because it's nice to have that gap filled in. It feels good. It feels great. It makes you feel more whole than you did before you knew that person. But the thing is, that's not what attracted. We think that it's what attracted. Many people think that's where the attraction happened, but that's not where the attraction happened. The attraction happens on the stuff that's similar. But the opposite stuff is appealing. And I want to point out the difference. There's a difference between attracting and appealing. Appealing is really, it's not about attracting. It's just, it feels, it's interesting. It has a positive connotation to it. But that's not the actual attracting part. Yes, focusing on positives helps us to attract, but it isn't actually the positive itself that does the attracting. We're the ones who do the attracting because of our vibrational level. It's a subtle distinction, but it's an important one. I think I remember Abraham actually saying at one point that opposites do not attract. It's impossible for opposites to attract.
Yeah, right. I see what you're saying.
It's only the same vibrations that can attract.
It also, though, brings up the idea that I see, like, let's say you're a painter or a sculptor, and you're in the midst of doing your artwork. Well, there's these the real positive parts that you're creating on that sculpture, are continually telling you the next thing to do. But the parts that are unformed yet, the parts that are like on the painting, say that you don't yet know what's going to go in that part of the painting if you're just creating it completely from imagination. That those areas become like the unknown, right? And from the unknown, if we open to the unknown, then interesting things can come out of that. Some of the most creative things, I think, probably come from the fact that we don't know what's coming next. Like if you have a partner and you don't know, how she or he is going to react in a certain situation or what they might bring into your life, that's a source of interesting contrast, because it could be something that you think is going to be detrimental in your life or harmful, but if you have an attitude from that unknown, interesting and beautiful things could emerge that could be incredibly. They could teach you. You could learn whole new things that could cause you to expand in ways you never imagined before. So maybe that's some of what the value of the not knowing, in somebody that you meet who is really different than you.
That could be.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that could be. That makes sense. The thought that was occurring to me is that the illustration you gave was kind of ironic in a sense, because I've been learning recently how artists, especially painters, rarely create stuff out of nothing. It turns out they have all kinds of tricks that they use in order to, trace stuff onto the canvas that they're trying to paint. They don't actually just do it from their imagination most of the time. But you're also right that on those occasions when an artist does do something strictly from their imagination, it's going to be kind of wild, kind of out there, and so you never really know what you're going to get out of it. And if you're willing to be open to it, you can get some pretty good stuff out of it. I think that's probably, I'm not an art expert at all, so I'm kind of speculating outside of my realm here, but I get the impression that, for instance, Impressionism, I get the impression about Impressionism. Impressionism is about a feeling that comes from an abstract presentation of something, and I'm sure that abstract side of it came out of their imagination, because they weren't actually seeing these weird shapes and these weird colorings on whatever subject they were painting. They saw it in their mind's eye and they painted it that way. So, I don't know, that's a little bit off topic.
It's just an interesting aspect about relationships,
yeah.
About being with somebody who's not just going to agree with you on everything, and then to see how much that does expand our universe by being in those kind of situations.
We should probably also address relationships that are not intimate personal relationships, because there are other kinds of relationships that people get stuck on. I mean, the first one that comes to my mind is work relationships. If you have tough work relationships, it can make your life at work pretty tough. And you often have to deal with this kind of stuff depending on what your work environment is. I guess on the really horrible side of it / good side, lately there's been all this stuff coming out about sexual harassment in the workplace and all these famous people who are being accused all at the same time. It's created like a snowball effect. And the good news is that it's all coming out. The bad news is that it happened, but the good news is that it's coming out, and maybe there's actually going to be some positive change about this kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be anything that extreme. It can be just more mundane difficulties in the workplace. There can be somebody, I can think of one person I worked with who I actually got along with fairly well, but he could be kind of abusive. And, it wasn't like an all the time thing, but, if it happens sometimes, if it happens often enough, it just kind of piles up inside your subconscious mind, if you know what I mean. And that's unhealthy. And you need to have strategies to deal with that. Well, I think that's something we should address. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, in any kind of relationship, there's the one aspect, like Abraham said, if you want improved relationships, focus on the positive qualities in yourself and in others and make lists of those positive qualities, and you'll start seeing more and more and more of that show up. And that's a very powerful thing. And there's also, to call a spade, you've got to draw boundaries with people. Like if you're in an abusive relationship and it's clearly the things that are happening are, unwanted behaviors from the other person, well, then they have to be named, and there has to be discussions about these behaviors, and there has to be a way to have a dialogue with the other person that is a healthy dialogue that will then enable each person to express what their wants and needs are in that relationship, and then what their requests of the other person are. And there's a lot of techniques out there. I'm thinking especially like of the work of Harville Hendricks, Hendrix.
I know who he is. Yeah.
Of how you create this dialogue, and I think we talked about it on the last call we were on. Creating a dialogue with your partner, where you get to listen to their wants and needs, and then you feed back to them, and then you arrive. You express yourself, and they listen to you and feed back to you what they're hearing you say, so that you can both arrive at understandings about the situation, so that it doesn't go on and become a festering wound in that relationship, that somebody is feeling abused and the other person is being the abuser, and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting you mentioned Harville Hendricks, because I have a client actually, a website development and hosting client who specializes in the teachings of Harville Hendricks in his practice. He's a psychotherapist. So the fact that you mentioned that, I said, oh, yeah, I know who that is. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that kind of thing is vital to address. Another thing, this is something that the LOA circle brings to the table in a really nice way, is that we can focus, kind of like what you're doing with your partner, we can focus on the stuff that we like, and we can, in a sense, sort out the stuff we don't like, and decide that we're going to get excited about the stuff that we like and only react to that and only relate to that. And any time that the stuff that we don't like happens, you can literally walk away from it. I mean, if it's your boss and your boss has you on the carpet, you can't walk away from it. But most of the time in the work environment, if something is happening, you can walk away from it. Even if it means taking like a 5-minute break to get away from it, you can get away from it. And if it's something where the person is in your face, well, unless it's even if it's your immediate supervisor, you can go to his supervisor or her supervisor. You can go up a level and say, look, I've got this thing going on here. And, most of the time I get along with this person, but there's this other side. And it's interfering with my ability to get my job done. It's wearing me down in my private life. And this is not a good thing. So there are a lot of things you can do to adjust the way you're looking at the situation. And in the process, set yourself up so that you're only tending to attract the good stuff that you want, and it may even result in changes in personnel where all of a sudden that person goes away and somebody else replaces them, and it comes like out of the blue, just because you're focusing on the right stuff.
That's exactly the way it works, and the same with your partner in marriage or dating or anything. Like we were saying earlier, focusing on the stuff that we want and minimizing our focus on the stuff we don't want. It's the same as if you have an illness. If you focus on the symptoms and you really get into them and really notice your symptoms over and over again, and that just becomes your complete preoccupation is the amount of pain you're having. Well, it's understandable, you know, when we're in pain, and it's hard to take our focus off it. But
you still have to.
There are a lot of things where we're overdoing it to the degree that we're keeping it extremely alive, and we're making it much more sensitive than it needs to be. And sometimes that's, you know, for each person, they have to feel out whether they're doing that or not and what they can do about it. But it's amazing how focusing on what feels good or just going general, you know, taking our attention just off the problem and focusing on something else entirely different, something that we love, something that feels better to us, that allows that other thing to dissipate. Like you said, you know, it can, you know, that other employee that you're not getting along with might get transferred to another department all of a sudden, or that supervisor you have that's so difficult, you know, something will happen and there'll be a new situation that will enable you to no longer be, you know, feeling like you're the victim of that supervisor's, you know, attitude. But so much of it comes from our vibration, you know, what we decide we want to focus on. And I love the thing that Abraham says is make problems like bumps in the road rather than like big deals, you know, instead of making them into mountains. So if we can do that in our relationships, you know, like when something is not pleasing us, can we somehow look at it as not a huge deal, but something that can be overcome, and that every obstacle, we can get around every obstacle. So it's just a question of, well, if I just let this be a little bit, I focus on the things I appreciate, will this obstacle just disappear over time? You know, or, you know, sometimes you need to go have that talk with that person, but then let it go. You know, how can we let these things go?
And how can we recognize it in the first place? What you were talking about brought to mind that we had some company over the weekend, and it was mostly a good visit. But there was one point in the visit where one of the people who visited us was talking about a political issue that's very prominent today, and he was really vehement about it. He was getting angry about it, and he just kept focusing on it and focusing on it and focusing on it, to the extent that, you know, I was actually getting pretty tired of it pretty quickly. So I was trying to, you know, point out to him, well, you know, the longer you focus on it, the more it happens, and, you know, maybe we should focus on this instead. And he kept pulling me back. You know, until we recognize that we're doing it. That's the first step. We have to recognize that we're doing it. We have to pay attention to ourselves and say, geez, am I stucking myself? If you know what I mean? Am I sticking myself in a place that I can't break away from because I insist on focusing on this negative stuff that's going on? Because until you notice that you're doing it, it's easy to not notice it when you aren't deliberately noticing it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Well, it totally makes sense. But and also, it's like it's easy to feel like that I don't know any way out of not focusing on it. Right? When the problem feels really heavy in our body and we feel it in our guts and everything, it's like how do you just say, oh, I'm not going to focus on this problem. You know, it's possessing us. You know, it's feeling like everything, and we feel it as sadness or disappointment or regret or anger. That's when it's difficult to believe that, oh, I'm just going to take my focus off the problem, put it on what the solution would be. You know, but that's where sometimes we have to sit with it. You know, we got to feel it, and then eventually say, okay, what would be a better feeling than this? How could I begin to move away from this? A lot of people don't believe that taking their focus off the problem is helpful. They think if they take their focus off the problem, that they're copping out.
Yeah, that's true.
The situation.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, especially in the last year. People who were unhappy with how the election of last year turned out very often say exactly that kind of thing, that, you know, I've got to focus on this. This is important. That you can't just let this stuff go. And my answer is always, yeah, you can. You really can. And it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, well, you know, but I mean, it's a tricky thing. Like if you're in an abusive relationship and your partner's, you know that they're abusing you, you can't just like let it go. You have to address it. You know, you have to either get out of that relationship or you have to get into a really constructive dialogue with that person, maybe with the use of a therapist, where, you know, you're going to address that abuse. And I feel some way that's true in governments too. It's like, how do we not address abuse if we feel like it's coming down the pike. If someone is taking advantage of us, like these women who are stepping out and naming these men who were sexually abusive, it seems like, well, that has to happen. There has to be the naming of it. Then the question to me is, okay, then where do we go from there? Once we've named it and it's out in the open, now how do we have healing take place? How do we move in the direction that we want to go? And that's where focusing on the positive aspects of our lives and, charting a new way forward becomes so important.
Oh, it definitely does. In fact, you mentioned that issue, and it occurs to me, not just with that issue, but many, many issues, the solution that so many people want to start with is, well, we got to talk this out. We got to talk it out. And true, talking stuff out can be a great way to release resistances that we're holding up, that basically are holding us up, that are preventing us from, having the kinds of lives that we want to have. But by the same token, on the flip side of that, you can also talk things out for the purpose of continuing to dredge them up so that you have more need to talk them out. It can become an endless cycle. Yep. And if it's the second kind, it's actually counterproductive. So at some point, you have to make the shift. At some point, you have to say, okay, I got it out. I expressed it. Now what do I do to change my thinking so that it doesn't happen again? Because if you don't take that second step, you just get stuck on the first one.
That's right. That's so key, and I guess that's where law of attraction comes in, because if we understand that whatever we're focused on, we're going to get more of. So if we're going to focus on naming abuse, name it, but then there's got to be a way to move on.
Right.
There's like, I remember when I was in a previous relationship and we were dealing with my wife's really not so balanced ex-husband, and we got this book about how do you deal with people that are threatening you in your life, that are abusively threatening you, and it said you basically just have to just say no. You say no, you're not doing this, and then the second biggest principle is you don't engage with them. So in a way, it's like that going general thing. You name the abuse, and then you get out of that abusive relationship. You get away from that instance of abuse. And then, we can begin focusing on, well, what's the life that we want now that we're keeping our distance from the chance of being abused,
Yeah, I think I'd add something to that list. It's a good list, but I think I'd add something that kind of mirrors your third point, but makes it a little bit more specific. I mean, using the example of the people who are coming out about the sexual abuse in the workplace. Okay, we've named all the people. We've expressed the frustration. We've expressed the vulnerability and the anger and the feeling betrayed and feeling taken advantage of and feeling small and weak and so forth. Great, we've addressed that. Now, what does a healthy relationship look like? Let's talk about how the relationship should look. What would be the ideal kind of work relationship? What does it look like and what does it feel like to actually respect somebody, not because of what they are as an object, but because of who they are as a person? And when we start talking like that, now we're actually doing the healing. Now we're actually making the motions that take us forward in life. Until we get there, until we take those steps, we're actually still treading water.
Yeah, and that's imagining the positive relationship. That's imagining it the way you would prefer it to be, and that's how you attract that.
That's right. That's exactly right. We've got a little under a minute and a half left. I do want to give you a chance to tell listeners who might be interested in your coaching service how they can find more about you. So how do they find more about you, Tom?
You can contact me on my website, which is youarejoy.com, youarejoy, the three words youarejoy.com. And there's a page on that website called a free discovery session, so you can have a free hour of coaching with me. Then you can decide if you might like to do more coaching with me, and hopefully in that hour get a heck of a lot of positive information as well.
Very good. We also urge you, if you have not yet subscribed free to this podcast that we do, please do so. Just go to loatoday.net if you're not already there. Click the button that says subscribe, or you can subscribe on iTunes on your iPhone, or even through the podcast software on your iPhone, or you can subscribe if you have an Android phone through Google Play. So lots of ways to do it. And Tom, it's been a pleasure. Can't wait to talk to you again on Friday.
Yeah, looking forward to it, and give everyone a good boost of confidence to have a wonderful week going forward.
Sounds great. We'll see you all tomorrow here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.